Hi, and welcome to this week's video blog. I'm Sarah Hammerker, and I'm glad you joined me. Today I want to talk about the tools for argument. Now, this may sound like I'm encouraging you to equip your children to argue with you, but that's not the case. Arguments can be very constructive, but more times than not, the way we disagree negates any positive outcome. If your house is anything like mine, my kids get into some pretty heated arguments over some pretty silly, at least to our grown-up sensibilities, things. Providing kids with the skills to have discussions that are respectful and fruitful is one key to reducing sibling conflict and also for helping your children learn how to resolve conflict. Here are some ground rules for arguments. I strongly suggest that you kind of go over these points when all the kids are calm, and then you step in and you guide the discussion for the first few fights afterwards, and then you also just do spot checks to help remind them of how you're supposed to do. And I encourage you also to use these for your own arguments, and I think you'll find that you'll be more fruitful and they will not get as heated as quickly. Think about the blame. One thing we shouldn't do is blame other people. Sure, it might be their fault, but we all should start with taking responsibility for our own actions because 99.9% of the time we have done something to contribute to this argument. So be careful that your kids are not constantly pointing the blame. Help them to own up to their own sense of what is their responsibility. Again, help them to stay calm. Help them to come back to the argument when everyone is calm instead of continuing while it's heating. Help them to see that they have permission to step away to calm down and then go back and resolve the conflict. Remind them to use their words, not their fists. And I did another video on this that you can find and watch when I talk about that. And remember that their words should be kinder rather than inflammatory. And listen. I'm going to go over the 5 active listening stages because this can really help our kids learn how to argue effectively, not to win arguments, but to have the conflict resolved in a way that both parties agree is a positive thing. Step 1 is the listener needs to pay attention to the speaker. Help your children to pay attention to each other or to another child or even a teacher when they're having a disagreement. 2, the listener needs to show that he's listening. Body language, nodding, smiling. You may not be smiling during during an argument, but you do need to kind of acknowledge that you're paying attention. You need to provide feedback. One way you can do this is just saying back what the person said to you, but be sure you provide feedback. Hold off on judgment until the speaker has finished talking. Most arguments become more full-blown when we don't take the time to let the other person have their say, and then they should in turn let you have your say. The listener needs to respond by following the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's most important that we remind kids that they may be out for what they feel is their right, just response, but we also need to remember you want to be listened to. You want the person you're having a discussion or disagreement with to hear you, so you need to extend to them the same courtesy. After the listening stage, you need to think about parroting back. So you hear someone, I hear that you said you were really hurt when I took your truck. Things like that. Help the children to learn how to restate what the other person is saying. And then help them to work toward a solution that solves the problem. Not just the issue at hand, but kind of heals the breach. And this can be hard for kids. They can think, well, how do I solve the problem? And you start when they're toddlers and they're fighting over a truck, and you kind of guide them through that, and you say, you make suggestions. Well, what if you take turns? Okay. What if, X happens? And then you start to kind of guide them through that, and then you start stepping away as they get older, and you kind of let them solve it. Now they're going to come up with some pretty silly solutions, but you let them give it a try and see how it goes. Help them to apologize, and I'm going to do another video in a few weeks that kind of goes over how to apologize, but make sure that apologies are a part of the argument toolbox. And then you practice. Practice, 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 because we all know practice makes perfect. It's important that we help our kids go over and over how they're going to have these tools in arguments. And I would suggest that you do this when they're not having the argument, or after they've had it, go back and kind of go, okay, let's walk through that again and see how we could do it differently. Not with everything, but I think with some arguments, it can be helpful to kind of revisit that so that they can put these things into practice, especially the active listening stages, which I've listed along with this video information. So those are kind of the tools for argument. And I think as you kind of practice them yourselves, help your kids practice, I think you'll find that your household will run a little bit better, and your kids will feel a little bit not so like they don't know what to do with an argument. If you kind of know how you're supposed to shape an argument, how you're supposed to respond, it can make you feel maybe a little less scary and can help keep those emotions down. Well, thank you for joining me for today's video, and I hope I'll see you another time.